I could feel the familiar pit in my stomach, the tightening of my chest, as I watched her kiss me goodbye. The words she said were comforting, warm even, but they didn't hit me the way they used to. "Thanks for the ride," she smiled, stepping out of the car. But there was something in the way she avoided looking me in the eye. Something in the way she slammed the door a little too hard, as though trying to mask the hesitation in her every movement. And when she turned away, I saw it, the car already parked across the street, the unmistakable black sedan waiting with its engine idling. She didn't even glance back at me as she walked toward it, slipping into the passenger seat with the kind of familiarity I'd once had. The kind of familiarity that had been mine alone. I stayed in the car for a moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. A knot formed deep in my gut, the realization dawning on me that this wasn't just a casual thing. This wasn't about convenience or just being polite. This was deliberate. And as the car in front of me slowly pulled away, I couldn't shake the thought that something had shifted between us, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. 4 months now, I'd noticed the small changes in her behavior. The way she'd get distant when I tried to talk about something serious, how her phone would always be face down when she was around me, the late nights at work that stretched longer and longer until I felt like I was the one fighting for her attention. And now, this. This morning routine of hers, where she would never let me drop her off at work. Always with some excuse, some vague reason that never felt quite right. It was the coworker, of course. I knew that much. She'd mentioned him in passing a few times, how helpful he was, how he was always willing to lend a hand. The kind of guy who made everything easier, or so she said. But there was something in the way she said his name that left a bitter taste in my mouth. I wasn't naive. I knew what was going on, even if I couldn't fully bring myself to acknowledge it. The car was just the final piece of the puzzle. The evidence I had been waiting for, hoping I wouldn't see, but here it was. I slammed the gearshift into drive and pulled away, my hands shaking as I navigated through the streets. The image of her slipping into the car, the way she had smiled and waved as though nothing had changed, played over and over in my mind. I couldn't let go of the thought, what was I missing? Was this just her being distant, or was there something more? Something I had been too blind to see? I needed to clear my head. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to get them sitting in my car. When I finally pulled into the parking lot of my office, the reality of it all hit me. I'd been driving aimlessly for the past 20 minutes, avoiding the confrontation that was inevitable. I was going to have to face the truth, whatever it was, and it wasn't going to be easy. I took a deep breath and walked inside. My colleagues were already bustling around, going through their morning routines. I waved at a few familiar faces, but I couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. My stomach was still tight, that knot deepening with every passing second. I had to get it out. I couldn't keep ignoring the signs. As the hours dragged on, I found it impossible to concentrate. Every meeting, every email, felt like it was happening to someone else, not me. My mind kept returning to her, her face, her smile, her hesitation. And that damn car, always there, lurking like a shadow. I couldn't focus on my work. I couldn't focus on anything except the question that kept nagging at me, what was going on? That night, after the office had emptied out and the only sound in the building was the hum of the air conditioning, I sent her a message. Short. Direct. I need to talk. Her reply came almost instantly. Is everything okay? I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. What was I even going to say? How could I confront her without sounding paranoid, without accusing her of something I wasn't entirely sure about? But I couldn't keep pretending like nothing was wrong. Can you meet me tonight? After work. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The conversation was inevitable. It had to happen, whether I was ready for it or not. But the thought of hearing the truth, whatever it was, made my stomach churn. What if I was wrong? What if I had been imagining all of this? Her response came moments later. I can't tonight. I've got plans with James. James. The coworker. The one I had never met, but whose name had been lodged in my mind for weeks now. The one who, it seemed, had become the priority in her life. I swallowed hard, the tightness in my chest becoming unbearable. There it was, right in front of me. The truth. I hadn't wanted to admit it, but it was undeniable. I understand, I typed back, my hands trembling slightly as I did. We'll talk soon. But I didn't believe that. I didn't believe we'd talk at all. Not now, not after all of this. I put my phone down and sat back in my chair, the weight of everything finally crashing down on me. She had chosen him. She had chosen the coworker over me. And no matter how hard I tried to deny it, the truth was staring me in the face. For the first time in a long while, I felt completely alone. The hours seemed to stretch forever. I found myself staring at the same documents on my desk, but none of it mattered anymore. I couldn't focus on work, couldn't even pretend to care. My mind kept looping back to her, how her voice always sounded slightly different when she spoke about him, how she'd mention his name with just a little too much ease. I could almost hear it now, James, casual, effortless, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I'd noticed the changes, of course. How she'd started coming home later and later. How she started answering texts with short, dismissive replies. How she'd made excuses not to go out on weekends, telling me she had work or other plans, plans that she never once clarified. At first, I tried to chalk it up to stress. We all had it, especially with work. But this? This felt different. Her sudden need for independence, her reluctance to share even the smallest of details with me, it was starting to feel like something I couldn't ignore. And then there was James. The coworker who had slowly slipped into every conversation. I had to admit it to myself now, I was terrified. Terrified of what I knew, terrified of what I didn't know. What was happening to her? To us? The more I thought about it, the more the knot in my stomach twisted. I remembered the morning she left so quickly, not even glancing back at me. It wasn't just the car parked across the street, it was everything. She was slipping away, and I wasn't sure if I could get her back. But I had to try. I paced the office for the next few hours, the silence of the building pressing in on me like a weight. The night stretched on, and with each passing minute, I became more agitated. I couldn't wait until tomorrow to confront her. I needed answers now, not later. Around 6 p.m., I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I grabbed my things, ignoring the stack of papers on my desk that I should have finished. I was done with pretending everything was fine. I left the office in a rush, driving through the streets as though I were on a mission. The city felt unusually quiet, and the moment I pulled into our apartment parking lot, I knew something was off. I didn't see her car in the usual spot. I frowned, my heart sinking. Maybe she had stopped by somewhere else, or maybe she was out for dinner. But then I saw it, a familiar car, the black sedan, parked just a few spots down from mine. I froze for a moment. It was James's car. My stomach dropped. I tried to swallow the knot in my throat, but it didn't go away. I wasn't sure what to expect when I walked into the apartment, but I wasn't ready for what I found. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and stepped inside, my heart pounding in my chest. It wasn't a huge apartment, just a small space with a few rooms, but everything about it felt foreign, cold, like I wasn't meant to be here. I heard laughter, soft, like a whisper, coming from the living room. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I didn't want to believe what I was hearing, but I knew. I knew exactly who it was. I took a hesitant step forward, peering around the corner. There they were. She was sitting on the couch, her body angled toward James, her eyes bright as she laughed at something he said. It was the kind of laugh she used to give me, the kind of look that used to be mine. But now it wasn't. I felt the air leave my lungs, a suffocating silence settling over the room. My legs almost gave out beneath me, but I steadied myself. I wanted to walk in, confront them, ask her what the hell was going on. But something in me, something deep down, told me that I wasn't ready. That maybe the answer wasn't what I wanted to hear. Maybe I already knew. I took a step back, my mind racing. I needed air. I needed to get out of that place, away from them, away from the truth I didn't want to face. Before I could turn around, the sound of her voice stopped me in my tracks. "Hey," she called, but there was no warmth in her tone. It was flat. Detached. Almost indifferent. I forced myself to look at her, even though it felt like I was looking at a stranger. "What's going on?" I managed to ask, my voice shaking more than I wanted to admit. She stood up from the couch, her movement stiff, like she was preparing for something. She walked toward me slowly, but I didn't move. I couldn't. She began, but she trailed off. Her eyes flickered to James for a brief moment, and I caught the smallest flicker of uncertainty in her gaze. "Can we talk?" she said, her voice barely a whisper. My breath caught in my throat. "About what? About him?" She flinched, but the moment passed quickly. She nodded, taking another step toward me. "Can we just sit down and talk? Please?" I didn't want to. I didn't want to hear whatever she had to say. But a part of me knew I had to. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. Not anymore. I nodded reluctantly and followed her into the kitchen, where we sat at the small table we'd shared so many nights, talking about everything and nothing. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, answers, an explanation, or perhaps just closure. But I wasn't prepared for what she said next. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she began, her voice trembling. "James and we've been getting closer lately, and I didn't know how to tell you. I never wanted to hurt you." I felt the blood rush from my head, my mind struggling to process her words. Closer? How close was she talking about? How much of this had been going on behind my back? "Is this what you want?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The weight of the question pressed down on me, suffocating me with every word. She looked at me, her eyes searching mine for a moment, like she was trying to find something in me. "I don't know," she said softly. "I don't know what I want anymore." And just like that, I knew. I knew that this was it. There was no going back. It was late by the time I left the office. My mind was still racing, filled with 1,000 unspoken questions I didn't have the answers to. The day had been a blur, every conversation a hollow echo. The flickering fluorescent lights above me only reminded me how tired I was, physically, emotionally. I wanted to sleep. I wanted to forget. But I couldn't. Not now. Not when everything felt so off. I threw my jacket over my shoulder and walked to the car. I'd taken the long way out of the office, avoiding the familiar route I'd always taken with her. The thought of driving by the places we'd shared, coffee shops, restaurants, the street corners where we had kissed, was more than I could handle. The car ride home was mechanical. I didn't even remember starting the engine. But when I pulled into my driveway, I finally allowed myself to take a breath, and that's when it hit me again, the suffocating weight of betrayal. I parked, took a moment, and stared at the empty house in front of me. The space that had once felt like home now felt like a prison. I was trapped inside my own head, replaying the moment I saw her get into that damn car. How could she? How could she be so careless, so distant? The memories of her, the one who had once held my hand and kissed me like we were the only two people in the world, felt like they belonged to someone else. I pulled myself together and walked inside, my footsteps echoing in the quiet house. It was colder than usual. The silence felt too heavy, too final. I tossed my keys on the counter, my eyes skimming the empty kitchen. Everything was still. Everything was wrong. She'd been so careful. So meticulous. She'd shielded herself, made sure nothing was ever out of place, until tonight. That simple text. The one I had hoped wouldn't come, but did. The one where she so casually mentioned her plans with James, the coworker I had never fully trusted, even though I tried to. But I wasn't stupid. I'd seen the way she talked about him, light, flirtatious, like she didn't even care if I noticed. My mind kept going back to that damn message. "I can't tonight. I've got plans with James." It wasn't the words that bothered me, it was how easily she said them, how quickly she brushed me off. She hadn't even fought for us. She hadn't even tried to explain. The hurt was sharp, but I was more angry than anything. Angry that she had made this decision without giving me any warning. Without even considering how it would feel when I finally found out. I went into the living room and dropped onto the couch, my hands pressed against my forehead. The urge to call her, to demand an explanation, was overwhelming, but I knew it wouldn't help. She'd made her choice. And it wasn't me. It was almost midnight by the time I finally decided I couldn't wait anymore. I reached for my phone, my fingers shaking slightly as I unlocked it. I opened our text conversation. I'd read her last message a dozen times, but it still felt unreal. How was I supposed to process this? How could I let go of the life I thought we had? I needed closure. I took a deep breath and started typing. "Are you seeing him?" The question hung in the air, heavy with all the things I didn't want to admit. I didn't want to hear the answer. But I had to know. I had to. I hit send and waited. Minutes passed, then half an hour. No reply. My heart started pounding in my chest, that familiar feeling of rejection settling over me like a thick fog. She wasn't going to respond. I looked at the phone screen, feeling that same frustration welling up inside me. I hated this. I hated how powerless I felt. I couldn't sit there anymore. I couldn't just wait and wonder what she was doing, who she was with. So I did the one thing that felt right in the moment. I got up and drove. I wasn't sure where I was going at first. I just needed to be somewhere else, away from the walls that had witnessed too much of my confusion and hurt. As I drove aimlessly through the streets, I thought about all the things I should have noticed. The small things, the way her smile had changed over the past few months, the night she came home late with no explanation, the way she had started spending more time with her coworkers. James. Her face had softened when she mentioned his name. It wasn't just that she talked about him often. It was the way she talked about him. The fondness in her voice. I wasn't blind. I knew what was happening. And I couldn't stand it. Finally, I ended up at a park, a place I used to go when I needed to think. It was quiet. The kind of quiet that let me sit with my thoughts without distractions. I sat on a bench, staring into the darkness. I wasn't sure what I was hoping for, clarity, maybe. But all I got was more confusion. Was this the end? Was this how it was going to be from now on? I had no answers. No closure. Only the cold realization that she had moved on without me. I checked my phone again. Still no message. I could feel my chest tightening, that weight settling in again. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drive to her place and confront her, demand the truth. But what if there was no truth to find? What if the truth was that she'd already made her choice, and it wasn't me? I leaned back on the bench, my eyes fixed on the sky, trying to find something to hold on to. Anything. But nothing made sense. It felt like a lifetime had passed before my phone finally buzzed. My heart skipped a beat as I saw her name on the screen. I didn't know whether to answer. I didn't know if I even wanted to hear what she had to say anymore. But I picked it up. I had to know. I'm sorry, her voice came through, strained and quiet. Can we talk? And in that moment, I realized something. I didn't know if I was ready to hear her side. I didn't know if I could handle the truth. But I knew one thing, I couldn't keep running from this. I had to face it, whatever it was. And I had to face her. It was almost 2 a.m. when I finally got the call from her. I hadn't expected it, and for a split second, I debated whether or not to answer. Part of me wanted to ignore it, pretend like I hadn't seen it, to pretend like I was in control of my own emotions. But that's the thing about love and betrayal, they don't allow you the luxury of indifference. I picked up the phone. Hey, her voice cracked slightly, and for a moment, I almost felt a pang of sympathy. But I pushed it down. There was no room for sympathy right now. Not with everything that had happened. Hey, I said, my voice more cold than I intended. You called. She took a deep breath. I could almost hear her hesitate, like she didn't know where to start. The silence stretched between us, thick and awkward. It felt like I was in a fog, trying to make sense of things that didn't make sense anymore. I wanted to shout, to demand answers, but I forced myself to stay calm. I don't know how to say this, she began. I could almost picture her sitting on the other end of the line, rubbing her face in frustration. I closed my eyes and tried to steady myself. Just say it. Whatever it is, just say it. Another long silence, and I could tell she was trying to find the right words. But there were no right words here, not anymore. This wasn't something you could fix with words. She'd already broken something, and it didn't matter how many apologies she offered, it would never be the same again. I didn't mean to hurt you, she finally said, and it stung more than I thought it would. I never wanted any of this to happen. I didn't know how to respond. The anger and frustration were boiling up in me, but I didn't want to let them out. Not yet. If I let myself feel too much, I knew I'd crumble. If I let myself feel too much, I'd do something I couldn't take back. Then how did this happen? I asked quietly, my voice almost breaking. How did we get here, Sarah? Her name felt foreign on my lips now. I didn't know her anymore, and she didn't know me. I wanted to believe that we could go back to how we were before, when everything felt easy and right, but I wasn't sure I believed in that anymore. I don't know, she said, sounding small, vulnerable. Things just happened. James and it was never supposed to get this far, but I guess it did. I closed my eyes again, trying to find a way to breathe. And you're just going to tell me this now? After everything? Matt, please, she said, and I could hear the panic in her voice. I'm sorry. I am. But I don't know what to do anymore. I don't know how to fix it. I don't even know if I can fix it. That admission felt like a knife in my chest. It was the truth, and it was painful because it was the truth. She didn't know how to fix it. She didn't want to. She'd already made her decision. I swallowed hard. You've already made your decision, haven't you? You've made your choice. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and I knew she was probably crying, trying to find the words to make it sound better. To make it sound like she hadn't just destroyed everything we had. Matt. She whispered, her voice trembling. I don't want to lose you. But I think I've already lost you. That was it. The words I'd been waiting for. The moment I had been dreading. I had always known deep down, but hearing her say it aloud made everything real. The tears came then, unexpected. I didn't want to cry, but they came anyway. And as much as I wanted to shout at her, to ask her how she could do this to me, I couldn't. Because I was too tired, too broken to argue anymore. You don't get to say that now, I said, my voice thick with emotion. You don't get to tell me you don't want to lose me after everything. I could feel her pain through the phone, but it didn't matter anymore. The trust was gone. The love I thought we had, it wasn't there anymore. It was nothing more than a faint memory that I couldn't hold on to. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Then don't say anything, I replied. It's too late. The finality of my words echoed in the silence between us. Neither of us spoke for a moment. It was almost as if we were both waiting for something, waiting for a miracle, maybe. Waiting for something to change. But it wouldn't. The damage had already been done. After what felt like an eternity, I finally spoke again, this time with a quiet resolve. I can't keep doing this. I can't keep pretending. We're not the same anymore. And I'm not going to be the person you need me to be, not after this. I don't want to hurt you, she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. But I don't know how to fix this. Then don't, I said, my words sharp. Because it's too late. And with that, I hung up. I sat there in the dark, the silence settling in like an old friend, a reminder of everything I had lost. The weight of her words, her admission, crushed me in a way I couldn't have prepared for. She didn't know how to fix it. But maybe the truth was, there was nothing left to fix. Not anymore. I looked at my phone, the screen still glowing in the dim light. The message that had once seemed like a lifeline, a connection, now felt like a distant memory. I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that we were fine when everything around us was falling apart. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know if I could move on from this. But one thing was certain, I couldn't keep holding on to someone who had already let go. I sat there, staring at the phone screen, the coldness settling over me like a blanket, and I realized that the hardest part wasn't the silence. It was the finality of it all, the truth that there was no going back. I had to move on. But I didn't know if I was ready. The next few days blurred together. I didn't answer her calls. I didn't want to. I didn't need her voice haunting me again, telling me she was sorry, explaining herself, apologizing for things that had already been done. It wasn't enough anymore. No number of apologies or late-night texts could undo the destruction she had left in her wake. I spent my time walking through the motions, showing up to work, answering emails, doing what was required, but my mind was elsewhere. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the image of her with him. Not in a way that made me angry anymore, but in a way that made me realize how much I had been lying to myself all this time. Maybe I hadn't really known her at all. Maybe I had built something up in my head that wasn't there. The days dragged on, but I didn't go anywhere. I stayed home, I stayed alone, and I thought about it. About everything. About her, about me, about what I wanted out of life. I had to stop asking myself questions that would never have answers. It was Friday when I got the text. She didn't call me. I didn't want to hear her voice anymore. Instead, she sent a message, just as simple and cold as everything else had become. I think we should meet. My first instinct was to ignore it. To delete the message and move on. But there was a part of me, a part one hated, that wanted to hear her out. That wanted to hear what more she had to say, as if there was something, anything, that could make this better. But I knew the truth. There was nothing left to salvage. Still, I found myself typing a response. Where? Her reply came swiftly. Meet me at the coffee shop. 5 o'clock. I wasn't sure what I was expecting. Maybe I thought she would beg me to forgive her, to take her back, to act like none of this had ever happened. Maybe I wanted to believe in that fairy tale, where everything could go back to the way it was before. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't be like that. It couldn't be. I showed up early, sitting at a table by the window with a coffee in front of me. I watched the street outside, my fingers wrapped around the warm cup as I tried to collect my thoughts. Part of me wanted to run. But another part of me felt like I owed it to myself to hear her out. At 5:05, she walked in. I spotted her immediately. Her face was pale, like she hadn't been sleeping, like she hadn't been eating, but there was something else in her eyes. A kind of determination. The kind of look people get when they know they've fucked up, and they're ready to make it worse. She looked around the coffee shop until her eyes landed on me, and then she made her way over. Her steps were slow, hesitant, but she still walked toward me. I couldn't look at her, not right away. I stared into my coffee, the dark liquid reflecting back the face I didn't recognize anymore. "I'm sorry," she said when she sat down, but her voice didn't sound right. It was softer than usual, strained, like she was rehearsing the words in her head. I couldn't make myself look up. "I don't think saying that matters anymore." "I know," she whispered. "I know." There was a long silence between us. I didn't want to hear her apologize again. I didn't want her pity. I didn't want her to feel sorry for me. I wanted answers, and I wanted them now. "Do you love him?" I asked, finally meeting her eyes. My words were calm, but they held something I hadn't been able to admit before, the fear that I'd never really been loved at all. Her face flickered with pain, but she didn't look away. "I don't know. Not in the way I thought. I didn't think it would go this far. It just happened." I didn't want to hear the excuses. I didn't want the story. I didn't want her to explain away what had been happening behind my back, behind closed doors, with someone I trusted. "Don't lie to me," I said quietly, leaning forward. "You knew exactly what you were doing." She flinched, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. But she didn't. Instead, she nodded. "I did. And I'm so sorry, Matt. I hurt you in ways I never meant to." But I wasn't sure if I believed her anymore. "You hurt me, yeah," I said, my voice more bitter than I intended. "But you also hurt yourself. And I'm not sure you even realize that." She stayed silent, her hands shaking slightly as she wrapped them around her cup. I noticed her wedding ring wasn't on her finger. I wanted to ask her about that, too, but something inside me told me it didn't matter. "Do you still want me in your life?" I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "After everything, do you think we can even fix this?" Her eyes softened, but there was something else there too, a heaviness, a weight. "I don't know," she said, barely above a whisper. "I don't know if we can fix it. I don't know if I can fix myself. But I don't want to lose you." I looked at her for a long moment, the silence stretching on. Her words didn't carry the weight they once had. They felt empty, hollow, as if they were something she thought I needed to hear, not something she actually felt. Finally, I stood up, feeling a sudden surge of emotion I hadn't expected. "I can't do this anymore, Sarah." I saw the shock in her eyes as she stood, too. "Matt, wait." I shook my head. "No. This is over. I can't keep doing this to myself, pretending that things will get better. I'm done." Her face crumpled, and for a split second, I thought she might reach for me, might beg me to stay. But she didn't. She just stood there, her eyes pleading with me silently. And I walked away. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know if I would ever heal from this, or if I would learn to love again. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had control again. The pain was still there, of course. It always would be. But I knew one thing for sure, I was done pretending. Done hoping for something that had already slipped through my fingers. This was the end. And as much as it hurt, it was also the beginning of something new. I wasn't sure what that new thing would look like. But I was ready to find out.